welcome to Philosophy Fools, a bi-weekly podcast where a young father and old bachelor talk about life, philosophy, and staying curious. After we catch up on what's triggered our curiosity since our last podcast, Josh and Uncle Greg dive into Eastern philosophy to discuss Laozi's Tao Te Ching. And spoiler alert, it's a fun journey! Finally, we'll wrap up with Josh's Dad Corner and Uncle Greg's Thought of the Week. Hope that sounds good, because that's what we're doing.
Good morning, Uncle Greg. How's it going?
Good morning, Josh. Everything's going great here. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. It's just a beautiful Sunday morning out in West Virginia here.
Sweet, and it's beautiful here in Arlington, Virginia as well. And it's been a while since we've gotten together. So I'm really happy that we're back chatting again.
Yeah, absolutely. The kids have been sick, so sometimes life just happens and we have to do it. So,
yes.
And what have you been up to the past couple of weeks? Anything new?
Well, I'm just for me, for the most part, just getting back into the groove of working. So that's that's an adjustment unto itself, since it's been 2 years since I've had to do anything other than just do whatever I want.
Yeah, that sounds miserable, but I guess you got to do what you got to do.
Well, exactly. But it's like everything in life. It's a bit of a paradox. There's a lot of things that are I kind of miss freedom. And at the same time, I really embrace the idea of these new challenges, things that in my own life, I would never think to try and create certain challenges that come up in business where I get that opportunity to bring my skills to the table and solve problems. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, well, I guess if you look at it like that, it's pretty awesome. I mean, so this week, I know we always talk about our curiosity triggers, and along those same lines, one of mine this week is that my wife has been working on starting an e-commerce business over the past couple months, and she finally released it. And so I've just been thinking a lot about that and how great she's done and how, starting a business is interesting because you don't need all the same skills as like a particular job. Like, so starting a business, I mean, you have to have all sorts of new skills, and a lot of times you're just learning as you go. And so it's really been fun. And with our combined skills, I mean, it really, it puts everything, it has made everything easy. And so I thought that was kind of cool as we're starting the business. One of the big things that really struck my curiosity is that it's not like the hardest thing in the world to start a business. And it's such a blocker. Like when you think about starting a business, you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so hard and it's so crazy. But it's not hard, but it is time consuming, and you do have to put in some work to it. And so, it just got me curious that we actually talked about this last time, just like little invisible blockers in the world. And how you just kind of have to, go and do things to see and to be creative and whatnot. And you just have to try. And so that was just one thing this week that definitely just got me thinking a lot.
I think that's great because it's 100% true, which is we tend to think we know things instead of just going out and finding things out. And so when it comes to something like starting a new business, that is awesome. You get an opportunity to bring pretty much all of your creativity to the table. And the reality is that you control so many parts of creating a business. And the only thing that you really don't control is the reaction to the business. But you absolutely can continue to adjust to new information coming in, like customer feedback, sales reports. All of these things are just data to let you know like what your next step should be.
And that's how we're really looking at this as an experiment, because we've started a couple small businesses, but it was service-based business, and this is our first step into the e-commerce world. And that's what it is. A lot of it is reading the market, but for us as newbies, it's really about experimentation and figuring out what's great, and using our 10 years of retail and customer service and buying stuff and being consumers ourselves and using all of our experiences to create what we want. So it's been super exciting.
Dude, I mean, we have this vast listening audience right now. Do you have a website you can plug?
Yes, for all of our audience guys, it's a little lazy, a little fit.com is our brand. And so it's just a little lazy, a little fit.com. It went live yesterday. You can get all sorts of graphic tees and whatnot, and we'll be expanding quite a bit over the next year. So we are super excited about that. Go check us out.
I'm excited to see what's coming. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's been getting me pretty curious over the past couple weeks. Another thing that has been getting me curious is we have been going on our hikes. So we try and do a lot of hikes in the spring and in the fall because the summer's way too hot. And now, so we have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So we've gone on 2 hikes over the past since the last time we've spoken. One hike was a 2-mile hike that was pretty difficult with like lots of rocks.
Yeah.
And kind of like straight uphill. And so our 1-year-old is strapped to me, so I'm kind of stuck with him. Now that's a challenge in itself. But my 4-year-old is pretty awesome because she did it all by herself. In the spring, all of our hikes, I would have to carry her for a lot of that, or Amber might have to carry her. And so it was cool to see in just a 5-month period how much she's grown. And so she did a 2-mile hike. And then the second hike we did yesterday was 5.1 miles. And she walked the whole thing without being picked up or anything like that.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it is awesome because she's 4 years old. And I know plenty of like 40-year-olds who can't do that. So
that is cool. And the cool thing is she's growing not only physically but mentally as well. So I'm sure she's enjoying the hikes in a way that like Charlie can't.
It's very true because we try and I of course always try and teach her things, but so I just try and spark her curiosity. Honestly, like I wasn't as curious about the hikes, but I know how much benefit they are mentally and physically for us, and for just us as a family to go out and accomplish like a 5-mile walk through the woods is pretty cool. And it makes us really feel more of a family together, and you can tell that everyone's much more relaxed at the end. And maybe that's just because the exercise, but maybe it's because we're out in nature, and maybe because we accomplished everything as a team and as a family.
And maybe it's all of those things.
Maybe it's a little bit of everything. I mean, because usually things aren't one thing or the other. It's usually a sprinkle of a whole bunch of things that create one pleasurable experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these things have been definitely keeping my curiosity up, keeping my kids' curiosity up, which is awesome. I was going to talk about Adeline. She's always pointing at different trees and different plants, and we're trying to find butterflies and birds and everything on the walk. So she's super curious about all that kind of stuff. So that gives me joy, and I know my wife joy, just to watch her curiosity like flourish when we're out in the middle of the woods. So it's really cool.
That's great.
How about you, Uncle Greg? I know I just talked for 10 minutes. So anything new going on curiosity wise over the past few weeks?
One of the things that just sort of jumped out at me is that we're here on the East Coast, and we're going through our seasonal change from summer to fall. And it struck me that seasonal change isn't just a physical thing that happens in the sense of it gets a little bit cooler. It really got me thinking, primarily because somebody made this really like sarcastic crack about people drinking their pumpkin spice lattes and how angry they were that people are drinking pumpkin spice lattes. And what is your problem? And beyond the fact that it struck me as a very weird thing for somebody to be concerned about, it really got me thinking about this idea that that on the East Coast, seasonal change comes with all of this kind of frame of mind changing. And you think about people using phrases like, well, it's sweater weather. And they aren't just saying that it's getting cool. It's a whole universe of like nesting activities that people do. and that they are, looking forward to sort of having to, sort of have a hibernation period, versus during the summertime, we have an interpretation of the summer that is an action-packed period, that you're supposed to be out and about doing things. And that weather theoretically doesn't have any impacts on any of these activities. You can absolutely sit inside and read a book during the height of the summer. But for some reason, people bring this valence of meaning to the change in the season. And I just find that very interesting. It makes me really curious about a lot of things that we've talked about, which are people making decisions for themselves. How much does the environment make your decision for you? And when we're in a period of time like the fall, is the advent of Halloween seems to be something that it really charges a lot of people with, I guess, a sense of nostalgia, a sense of old childhood, a sense of bringing old traditions to the future. And it's all triggered by this idea of like, oh, it's the fall. And it's just interesting how we as people have these different approaches, because when I lived on the West Coast in Oregon, the thing that you're dealing with is basically not so much seasonal change as much as it's either cloudy and rainy or it's beautiful. And so your changes are taking place very rapidly. And it's something that there was a winter when I was out there, but it only lasted for maybe a few weeks, where you really sat back and said, wow, it's really gotten cold. Because for the most part, you were always looking to have an umbrella and, sort of walk around and make sure that, maybe you'll need a coat and maybe you won't. But it's not something where, like on the East Coast, you really get to a point where you better have a coat no matter what, because it's going to be cold. And so, yes, but broadly speaking, the thing that was triggering my curiosity was this idea of us bringing meaning to something like the change in the weather, life meaning, changes in behaviors, changes in attitudes that aren't all applicable to the actual change in the weather. It's really applicable to a desire of ours to experience a fall season or experience a summer season.
Yeah, those are all like awesome points. And I actually noticed that in myself over the past couple of weeks, because a big thing with me is that cold weather, and this behavior is probably triggered from the cold weather and me thinking like this over the past 10 years. And it's great that we're talking about this, because as soon as it gets cold, I start eating chocolate. Like,
right.
All the time. And I just realized this, like, because we bought a bag of Halloween candy like last week and we ate like the whole thing this week. And I was like, why am I doing this? Because like, I know that for the past 6 months, I've been super healthy. And so what's happened? And it was just as soon as it went under 50 degrees, we just went to the store and said, we need chocolate. And it's probably due, just coming to think about it, it's probably due to the triggers that it's cold weather. Like Halloween is associated with candy, and then from Halloween comes Thanksgiving, comes Christmas, and all this is associated with eating lots of food. So it's definitely what we're fighting against our behavior. And it's funny that these things are triggered by probably just cold weather, or just the time period where we can just be like, we're going to be inside, no one's going to see us, we can do whatever we want, and that happens. And so I guess it's up to us to like kind of define and figure out what we're doing because of this cold weather, like getting fat or whatever that may be for you, and then kind of figuring that if we're trying to live our best life or whatever. I mean, I can eat plenty of Halloween candy and live a good life though.
Right. Well, and think about it. There's really truly no such thing as Halloween candy. It's just candy.
That's so true.
And it's candy that's available 24/7, 365 days a year. But we bring all this meaning to it because think about that. Halloween candy. We've just taken something that exists all the time, and then we put a frame around it and say celebration means Reese's cups or whatever.
Yeah,
And
I haven't had a Rolo in years, but it was in the bag of Halloween candy, so I guess I'll have it.
yeah, so yeah, just to wrap up that thought, it leads you into all of these kind of interesting, uh, curiosity-driven mind experiments to think about, like, well, what Thanksgiving is a day on a calendar, but it's also a feeling, and it's also a prescribed behavior, like you're supposed to do something on Thanksgiving, and that we rarely make a change from that. And that can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. It doesn't really. It's all about the fact that it's passive and not active. And so, what we learned from the Stoics was just that idea that, hey, man, whatever's in your control is in your control, and it's a good meditation moving into something like Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and thinking to yourself, like, how much do I control my Christmas? How much do I control my Thanksgiving? And how much do I give over to existing tradition?
Very true. I really like that. So
Cool.
yeah, is there anything else? Or are you close? Is that we're done with the seasonal change for now?
We are done with seasonal change.
So now getting into our main ideas this week. So we're changing to Eastern philosophy. So let's take a quick break. And then when we get back, we'll discuss our ideas from Laozi's Tao Te Ching.
Sounds great. And we're back. And Josh, this week, as usual, you're bringing something awesome to the table that I'm coming very late to the table with. And it's that you were reading Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, and it's helping us. We're transitioning in this conversation from hardcore Western philosophy to Eastern philosophy, which really is very different. Now, what kinds of things in your reading of the Tao Te Ching started just at the very highest of levels? What was kind of the experience of exposing yourself to that?
So it was definitely interesting. So I actually had a little bit of trouble processing the Eastern philosophy over the Western philosophy. So a little background is that so this book was one of my first experiences actually with I don't know like self-help or philosophy or whatever you want to call it. I was 20 years old when somebody let me borrow this book and I read it and I remember loving it and it having a good impact on like my thought patterns and everything back then. But then I kind of put it down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've listened to it probably 10 times over the past couple years too. And now that we've been going through this process of just talking out everything on the podcast, and really analyzing and figuring out the thoughts that I was getting from the book, man, I was honestly confused after reading this, and it was really hard for me to process it. And my main thought from this is that the Tao Te Ching, it's a lot of interpretation and analyzing of like basically a whole entire page of text
Mm-hmm.
to get to one point. And so I feel like we could honestly sit here and talk about each chapter for 30 minutes and come up with tons of different ideas from each chapter just from the text. But that's kind of like my overview is that the Western philosophy, I mean, like or everything that we were reading, like the Manual for Living, it was really like a sentence that was usually fairly actionable that was given by the philosophers, and then we could really take it to our own lives pretty easily. Where
Mm-hmm.
the Tao Te Ching is we have to analyze it and figure it out for ourselves, which I'm sure is just as beneficial, but it's going to be a different conversation, I think, in just between you and I in the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the one thing that's great about this is it does bring up this idea of cultural difference, which is that when we're reading something from Seneca and it's 2,000 years old, it's still familiar because it is the culture he was living in is similar to the culture we live in now. A lot of the same values, a lot of the same points of views, a lot of perspectives. And when we switch over to, say, Chinese philosophy in this case, that's just, it's a different culture, and they have different biases, and they have different points of view, and it's always very difficult to identify what is it about the culture I grew up in that's just baked into me versus things that are actual thoughts. And a great way to figure that out is to go to other cultures, and it helps you start to see, like, oh, well, this is just a whole different way of thinking, and but it's still thinking. And so it makes for a really kind of exciting shift, because I think there is a real strong sense of familiarity when you're dealing with Western philosophers, and it goes back to the whole idea of, like, fish don't know they're wet, and so we, growing up in a Western culture, don't know what's Western. We just think it's thinking, and
we just think it's normal.
Right. And so here we have an opportunity to look at how another culture, which has the exact same developmental pressures, meaning it's people in huts and people in the jungles, and they get together and then they start to live together. And it just so happens that when it happens in different places, entirely different sort of ways of looking at the world pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely going to be interesting talking here. I'm excited to talk everything out with you. And so I think how I want to do it is where I'll just kind of give you a little bit of the chapter, and then we'll kind of just talk about it and go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, sweet. So, all right, I'm going to start with chapter 9 here, and the iteration that I read, this is how it was interpreted. So it goes, fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. So, I mean, basically what I was thinking from this is that if you put too much into any endeavor, that there's going to be bad reactions to it and good reactions. So for instance, you can sharpen your knife and you can get it to a perfect blade and a perfect edge. But if you continue sharpening that same knife, then that knife will blunt. Mm-hmm. So like if you're trying to become a master of something, I mean, to what extent? I think that's what they're trying to get us to think here, is like you can become a master at something, but you can't go too far with it. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, what do you feel from that?
My gut is the idea of not having, or sort of fighting against nature, or fighting against the sense that we have a place in nature, and when we are doing things like, a good example is he uses the term chase after money and security, and that is very different than saying have enough money and have enough security. That he's implying this concept of chasing it, that there's never enough, that you just have to keep accruing more, in the same way that, you know, a sharp knife isn't enough. You have to keep sharpening it, and it's an obsession that you have. And to your point, it takes you to a place that goes beyond the utility of the action you were taking.
Right. Yeah. And see, that's crazy that you say that, because chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. That almost, to me, they're talking about like anxiety and whatnot. Like if you're chasing after that money and security the whole entire time, then you always have this feeling in your heart, like that life is crazy, and like you need to get this money and you need to get this security. And maybe that is because it's not, the money and security is not defined, kind of like what you're saying. Like once you define exactly what money and exactly what security you want, then you're not really chasing after it, you're just going towards it. And then is that, I mean, this is weird, because we kind of have to interpret it,
Right. And I think a part of it, and this is just based on my on some of my readings before this, is the idea of money and security is a thing that we may possess a sense, like I've got money a savings account, and it's FDIC insured. And that means that that money is as secure as that money's could possibly be. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow there isn't an event that wipes out the government that provides the insurance, that provides that money is still there. So so what I perceive as security is kind of an illusion, because I don't really control it. That change is going to come, things will happen, and that and I think that where Laozi, or where they're driving in the text, is just this idea of you're better off knowing that everything's kind of impermanent, and that the work that you do isn't really going to result in a perfect state of security or a perfect amount of money. It's just going to amount in money and some security in that moment. And that's good, but that's very different than believing that you can change a reality into something that's permanent, when reality is in fact always impermanent. And your brain is best served by understanding it's always impermanent.
Okay, gotcha. And
sense?
then that's it's a little, yeah, a little bit. So like the main point that they make at the end is do your work, then step back. That's the only path to serenity. So like if you, so kind of what you're saying is like if you had a project or whatever, you just have to do that, live in the project, do it to your best abilities, and then lay it down, and then that's kind of it. Like you can't be trapped to the point of like that project was everything in your life, or the money and security is everything in your life. Like you have to be able to just kind of put things down and take a step back and realize that, you know, everything is going to be okay. And that's just the path, the Tao, as they say.
Yes, exactly. And I believe that there is a sense there that there's always something else to do. Like there's always a next thing. And that the notion that, and by giving those examples of like, hey, you know, you got to fill your bowl with water. That's not the last time you're going to fill a bowl with water. You're going to go back and do that again. And the same thing with sharpening the knife is you're going to sharpen it till it's sharp, and then you'll sharpen it again when it's dull. But if you just sit there and sharpen it all the time, then you're wasting your time.
All right, sounds good. All right, so I think we got a little bit out of that.
I think so. What's our next thought?
All right, our next thought is from chapter 15, and it goes, do you have the patience to wait till your mud settled and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment, not seeking, not expecting. She is present and can welcome all things. So it's almost along the lines of kind of what we were just talking about, like whereas, but I really like how they use water as an example for a lot of things. Like in this instance, it says, like, do you have the patience to wait till the mud is settled and the water is clear? So what does that really mean? Like if your goal is to have a clear puddle of water, or if your goal is to complete your project, then what do you have to do? Like, are you able to just sit there and sit back and allow things to come? I think that's what they're getting at here, is that you just have to kind of, you know, things will present themselves throughout life, and you have to just use those things and basically and figure out life from what's presented to you. That's kind of what I get. I mean, there's a little bit more, but do you have any first initial thoughts to this?
The thing that I find interesting is this notion of not seeking fulfillment, that having a target, and this is an interesting challenge. It goes back to when we've talked in the past about the idea of paradox, about one thing being 100% true, and that potentially its exact opposite could also be a true statement. And that a situation like this, where not seeking fulfillment is not trying to fight the way, or not trying to fight nature. It's because it represents this idea of getting to a point where you're right. Like, I am now fulfilled.
Right.
And that is back to the original point. It's kind of an imaginary state, because if you're saying like I must get fulfillment, it has that emotional valence of being, it's like summiting a mountain. Like I am absolutely at the top of this mountain versus I am absolutely fulfilled. And that, I think that what they're trying to get at is that when you're in the present moment, and that essentially that concept of fulfillment is causing you to come out of the present moment. Your brain is in the future. It's not here and now, where you can experience that moment of seeing, say, the water clear. And I'm going to guess that metaphor is around the idea of like, if I need fresh water to drink and I've just walked through the water, I could get very impatient and just go ahead and drink muddy water, or I just wait until it's clear and then I can drink clear water.
I like that. Now, do you think though this metaphor, I mean, it's definitely a paradox. I mean, because you have to do something in order to be fulfilled, but like actively seeking something in the future is what they're talking about, right? So like, so you just have to be present with what's coming on. Now, I'm trying to think about what has happened in my past, like in my past when I feel like over the past year or so since we've been doing this, like just being present in my day-to-day life creates opportunities opposed to forcing the situation. Like really, like if I'm forcing myself to like create a new project or something like that, then like that usually causes like some kind of stress or whatever in my body. But if I just live my job and a project presents itself that fits what's going on with the situation, then that's going to be a better project for me to work on and use my time with, compared to a project that is just like something I'm creating to muddy the water, to to do something. That's kind of what I feel from this.
And what you just said just triggered this in my mind, which is this idea of I think there's an implication here that there is, in any given moment, there is a thing that needs doing, and that is very different from the thing you think needs doing. And it brought up an idea in my head of this. Let's say at just the crassest level, like you are intent on going on a hike, and in the moment your daughter says something like, I don't know, I'm experiencing extraordinary fear right now of bears or whatever, and that you in your mind are thinking like, well, no, we got to go on the hike. Your immediate fear of bears isn't the problem. The problem is that we aren't hiking right now. And that it's in this kind of context, you can possibly say, I have an intention of going on a hike, but that there are many things between here and the hike, and those may become the thing of most importance. But I do believe that there's underlying this is the notion of being able to identify the important thing, that you could fetishize things like, oh, things didn't go like on my way to my hike, I couldn't find a parking spot, so it's all over, we're going home. Like that is that's, you could actually interpret that to say, oh, well, I was paying attention to what happened in the moment, but you were still assigning a meaning to the fact that you couldn't find parking. That is, every part of this endeavor is wrong. Instead of saying, well, maybe we park further away and the hike is just gets us from where we parked to this parking lot, and that's our hike today. But
Right.
but my point simply being is that this is challenging because of that sense that there is, in the moment, there is right action, because you're accurately or appropriately reading the situation, and that there's unright action, which is you not doing that, where you're actually sort of, your ego or your intellect is saying, ignore this current moment because there's another moment coming, and that's the moment you really want, not the one you're experiencing right now.
So it's almost like in Western philosophy, like with having a purpose and then just basically being present, but always going moving towards that purpose without like, branching off into all these little things that don't make you keep on going towards that purpose.
Right. And I think that like Seneca, if it's either Seneca or Aurelius, one of those guys said something along the lines of, if you don't have fixed sails on your boat, then you're just floating around. So
Yeah.
there is value in having a destination. Like if you're on a boat and you don't have a destination, then you're just literally on a boat. And there's no difference between being on the shore. It's like, why have you gone through the trouble of getting on a boat? But when you give yourself that fixed destination, like, oh, I am going to go to this port, then in the present moment are all of these things you have to do in order to move towards that destination.
Right. So you're still living in the present, but you're not seeking that fulfillment, as they're saying how here in the Tao.
Yeah, exactly. Where and again, the notion of arriving at a port, very different than saying, because you don't say like, I've now arrived at this port and my life is over because I've succeeded at arriving at this port. It's just a step along the way. And the same thing goes with the concept of fulfillment. There isn't like a moment when there was a moment when you weren't fulfilled, and then there's a moment when you're fulfilled. That I think that the way would indicate that you are always fulfilled if you are genuinely engaging in life in the present moment.
Yeah, tough to interpret, and it's definitely a paradox. But I mean, I think the bottom line is what just be present and go towards a main goal.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you can assign this as being somewhat paradoxical, because I think there's I've heard people who will interpret things like the Tao as essentially being one of removal from the concept of progress, like where all you do is sit still and and then just address whatever life is bringing to you, and that you don't really participate as an actor. You're always a reactor, and that's different than saying than adding that little bit of information of saying, well, I would like to have enough food for my family, and then be able to take the steps along the way, being very present during that, but having a sense in your mind of that you have to do things to get the food for your family.
Right. All right, cool. I like it. I like that interpretation. Anything else on that?
No, that's good. That's it for me.
All right, cool. Let's take a quick break here, and when we get back, we'll keep on discussing the Tao.
Sounds great. See you in a bit. Hey, folks. Before we get back to our topic, if you're enjoying the show, please share it with others in any way you can. And you can always drop us a note at PhilosophyFoolsPodcast@gmail.com to let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there are any topics you'd like to cover in the future. Okay, let's get back to the show. Okay, and we're back. And Josh, what is our next thought from the Tao Te Ching?
All right, this next one is from chapter 27, and I'll read the excerpt and then we'll get to talking about it. A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving. A good artist lets his intuition lead him wherever it wants. A good scientist has freed himself of concepts and keeps his mind open to what is. Thus, the master is available to all people and doesn't reject anyone. He is ready to use all situations and doesn't waste anything. This is called embodying the light. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? If you don't understand this, you will get lost, however intelligent you are. It is the great secret. All right, a lot to unpack here. Or is it? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
So just a couple little things like what is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? Like I guess it's just talking about so what I got out of this concept is I guess it's really the whole idea of the Tao, and it's something that is tough for me to understand. So they always talk about the master and the Tao. And so those are like the two separate things here, I think, in the book. So the master is like this perfect person, the master of the Tao, the way. And the way is this path that everyone is supposed to take, or just this master is supposed to take. And I think what this is talking about is that there's both of everything. I mean, there's just a lot here, but like, what is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? So I like, you can teach me the right way to do things, say through this podcast.
Mhm.
Now, does that become your job? So I don't really know. Like, what do you get out of this chapter 27? Like, it kind of confused me a little bit. That's why I kind of, the like, a good artist lets his intuition lead him wherever it wants. Like, I was curious of like, what does that mean to you? Because I know you're an artist, and like how does that, is that really a good option for you?
I think that there is a challenge here, which is underlying the notion of the Tao is a broader challenge of philosophy in general, mysticism in general. It's that frequently there will be a tool that's used to express the unknowable. And like in Christian religion, it's the Trinity. It's or excuse me, in Catholic religion, where it's the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. That's a tool to say, like, look, man, this is as far as we go in terms of explaining anything. It's a mystery, and that is, and I think that the way, or the Tao, is serves that same purpose, which is he'll indicate ways in which you are in alignment with the Tao. And I think that the Tao is also a representation of nature. It's of the way things are, and that you're either fighting against the way things are, or you're in alignment or in harmony with the way things are. And so it doesn't have the same kind of it's not implied that you will ever know the way, like you'll never be able to write it down because it's kind of a mystery, but that you will have an intuition of when you are in harmony with the way and when you are out of harmony with the way. So I think that that's one big idea.
Right.
And then, but to your specific point about a good artist letting his intuition leading him where he wants, there's an implication there that there's such a thing as an artist, and that there aren't types of art. And so I think that, again, that they have to speak broadly. Like there's no, like, this is a philosophical, moral kind of text. And so there is a humongous amount of benefit to using your intuition in art. It's one of the parts that results from mastery of techniques, because that's a mastery of a technique, is being able to go from, I don't know how to do this, through all the kind of boring steps to learn exactly how to do that. Like, how do you use a brush to put a line down on a sheet of paper? That is, it's a tool. It's like a screwdriver or a hammer. There's ways to use it that are the most effective, and there's ways to, like, so if you only used a hammer by grabbing the head of a hammer and hammering down, you can get some use out of it, but it's by no means as effective as grabbing it by the handle and using the leverage and momentum that's attached to swinging the hammer.
So like, would a good example of this in the art world be like, so if you are taught 3 different ways to use your paintbrush, but then from other people, but then you go to your canvas and you start drawing, and you just let your intuition guide yourself, like, these other concepts, and you've used them, like, they're obviously in your mind, so they're part of you in some way, but then you just let your intuition kind of go and be itself, because that's what your true art is going to be. And like, that's
Yes, exactly. That once you get to a point of mastery with anything, then it's up to you, because you've internalized it. You aren't thinking about it anymore. it's just a thing that you can do. It's like driving a car. You don't really think about driving a car. Once you become a master of driving a car, you just drive a car. And the same thing goes with tools inside of creating art, is that if you aren't really a master of a tool, you're always aware of it. You're always kind of like, oh man, every time I try and do this, it doesn't work. Like, and your head is in it. Your intellect is still there. And
Right.
once you develop mastery with the tool, that simply becomes very much like your fingers. That it is in the same way that you don't think about using your fingers, that your brush is exactly the same thing. It's an extension of you. And so you can absolutely use your intuition to work in that moment. And so I am 100% in agreement with that. The comment about a traveler having no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving, I'm wondering if what he's saying is kind of what I said about the ship, which is that even though you have a fixed destination, that you don't get all wrapped up in like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I know I'm moving towards this port, but if I'm a bad traveler, I'm going to be very like rigid about how, like, well, you must use the sails in this specific way or else it's bad, instead of saying, oh, well, I'm going to use the sail in the best way to move me in a direction. Like, I'm reacting to what's happening. I'm not telling the situation what's happening.
And like a good scientist has freed himself of concepts and keeps his mind open to what is. So like kind of along those lines of the traveling, but like say if a scientist is trying to figure out whatever a scientist wants to figure out, if a certain plant grows a certain way, let's just say that, and then he does all these tests, but if he has an open mind, then maybe he can become a better scientist and learn more things that maybe not the project goal, but he's still just allowing things to come in as they come in. And he might be able to say, discover a new process of growing a plant or something like that.
Absolutely. And it goes down to the nature of science, because if you can imagine, there are theories of evolution is a theory of animal and plant development over time. There are some conclusions that have been drawn about that over time, and that for you and I, people who are, it's not our job to be scientists. It just gives us a helpful framework of how nature kind of works. But for the scientists, what they can't do is allow their knowledge of that to pollute them. They can say, like, oh, well, what's his name? Oh, God, the evolution of the species. God, who is that? Darwin, Charles Darwin. That they can begin from the perspective of Darwin postulates that this happens, and then they can sit down and try and test that. But it's very different than believing that what Darwin said was true, because then that scientist is not using their eyes. They're essentially trying to prove something they already know, and that's bad science.
Man, I really like this. Okay, this is starting to make a lot more sense to me now, because I was so worried because it said, if you don't understand this, you will get lost. However intelligent you are, it is the great secret. But now it makes a little bit more sense to me. I'm glad we talked it out.
Absolutely, and it's a great thing for us to always keep in mind, because we do want the example of the good traveler. I've been guilty of this, and I think it's a common human thing. But let's say you buy a ticket to Denver, and your desire, and it says it's going to arrive at 9:00, and then you create a whole reality around it's. I'm going to be in Denver by 9:00. And then you're flying and things are slowing down. Somebody gets sick on the plane and then they have to land it someplace different. And then you're just like, instead of just rolling with it and kind of going, well, this is the new reality. The thing that you're paranoid about is that you said 9:00. It's got to be 9:00. And if it's not 9:00, then everything's bad. And it's and that's the same. And so, but being the good traveler is, look, I have a plan, but it's not a fixed plan. That's the secret to that phrase, I think, is just that notion that all you do is make a plan, and then things happen as they happen. That if you're just in a constant mindset of we were going to have a beautiful summer afternoon and it rained and now everything's terrible, then you're a bad traveler, because instead of, as we've discussed in the past, just rolling with it and kind of go, oh, now it's raining. How do we have a good time when it rains? You say everything is destroyed because of the rain.
Right.
And so I think that, yes. So this really is a great chunk for people to digest, because it is so hard for us as people, because we really want, I think, as animals to know the right way, to do the right thing. It makes life easy when everything is in a little box that we just kind of extract when it's time to do that thing. Like travel equals this.
Right.
And then and you may not travel for a couple of years. And then when travel comes along, you say, okay, good, this is how travel works. And I think that what the Tao is trying to encourage everyone to do is to just kind of what Seneca is saying, is control the things that you can control, but just don't worry about the things you don't. Just kind of let it. It doesn't mean that you're passive. It doesn't mean that you aren't a participant. But what you aren't doing is shaking your fist at the sky and saying, why do you rain?
Right. Like you just have to get down this, like the Tao, you just have to go down this path, but there's no set path, but there is a path, like it's kind of a confusing paradox here. I mean,
and that the path is nature. The path is reality. It's what's happening all the time, whether we pay attention to it or not.
All right.
Okay.
Man, I like it. Okay, so we have one more point here. Now, this point, was my favorite thing about the Tao from when I was younger. And after our conversation, let's see if it kind of still resonates with me a lot. But I like this concept. So, water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock, which is rigid and cannot yield. As a rule, whatever is fluid, soft, and yielding will overcome whatever is rigid and hard. This is another paradox. What is soft is strong.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, cool. So, I thought about this. I used to like this a lot because what I thought about, like, I've always kind of been a softer person, and I never really put my foot in a lot of places where it shouldn't be or anything like that. And I always felt good from it. And what I was realizing is that just kind of being a nicer, and so what I related to this is almost nice versus mean in a way, but we can talk about a few other things. But one of the big things that I got out of it was like, you can be nice all the time, and say if somebody mean starts talking to you, you can still remain nice and calm throughout the whole time, and you may win. Like that say, if we're talking about people here, that person could even punch you in your face, and you can just sit there and remain calm and remain nice. Now, you might not be calm, you might freak out a little bit, but like if you remain calm in the situation, then when that situation presents itself as a story like the next day, then you know that being nice was the right move there. Because if you say like punch that person back in the face, you probably both are going to jail, after that situation, or you both are going to be in the wrong after that situation, in my opinion. And so like that's kind of what I've always thought about. Now, there's a couple other things I think about, but I wanted you to talk a little bit first. So what do you think about this statement?
I think that you're absolutely right that there is a corollary to kindness and aggression to this idea, because aggression is a very hard act, and it tends to be aggression by its definition isn't very expansive. It really is trying to get from one point to another. I am going to aggress on this other person, and then I'm either going to take something of value from them, or the act of aggression is simply a way for me to place myself above the other person. But it is a linear thing, whereas something like kindness is expansive, and it has that ability, like water, to expand out in many directions. Because it doesn't, kindness is not a direct thing. It's not like I am I'm 100% going to be kind to this one person. And that, because that's really not even kindness. So even that's its own kind of aggression. Kindness is truly, it's either broad or it isn't really kindness. And I think that, and reading that phrase, I've always found this to be interesting. I think I first heard this expressed by Bruce Lee. That was the first time that this idea was thrown out to me. And I did like the way it sounded, because it is a very specific observation of nature. It's a very time expansive observation of nature, because clearly a rock doesn't wear away in days. It takes long time for that water to do its job. And it's important that we have a sense of ourselves as either being rigid or flexible, and that this is Western talk again, but that there's an intention behind being either one, that you really, that there is something to be said about a kind act, or like you're saying, is that, like we heard Frankl talk about the idea of there being a gap between stimulus and response, and in that moment is your ability to decide. And that's the metaphor of somebody just hauling off and clocking you in the face, is that can lead to a very straightforward cycle of violence. You hit me, I hit you. You stab me, I shoot you. It's a self-fulfilling cycle. Whereas something like the idea of taking that moment to look at it from a perspective of kindness, it puts you into a spot of not, like you said, going down a road that there's just no coming back from.
Right.
And, yeah.
One of the other things that I think about this, like to get away a little bit of just being nice and not being nice, is that like in business, this is a way to create rules or create like business processes. And like, so this kind of got me curious about that. Like if you're setting up a process at your job, like what happens if it's a rigid and hard rule, and what happens if it's like more fluid and soft rule that's being implied. So one thing that I think about is like, how does a manager manage like one of his employees? Like, should that manager manage him from like a hard perspective? Like, this is the rule. You have to be here at 8. You have to leave at 4. Like, you have to do this, and really, put up a hard force. Or should these rules that are put in place be softer and more fluid? Like, and should that process, like, well, if your boss is managing you, like, should life is a fluid thing. Life is not a hard thing. And so should those rules like allow you to be more fluid and allow you to do more things, and be a little bit softer, so that you can respond better to these hard rules? Like, that's something that I think about a lot, is how much force is going to be put up against something, like if I'm creating a process of business. And so this is another thing that I kind of got out of this statement here.
Well, I think that there's a lot to be said about there's a lot to be said about combining this thought with what we were talking about in terms of travel, which is, in business, the issue is success. It's about being able to postulate what success is. It's to be able to say, like, what we're trying to do is X. Is that what people do all the time? No, not at all, because frequently some people are, if an organization is large enough, you can be so far away from what's considered the success criteria, meaning that the people in the C-level, the executive class, may have a very, very intense idea of what success for the next 5 years and 10 years means. But if you're all the way down and you're managing like 3 people in an organization of 100,000, it's possible you're just completely disconnected from knowing what that success is, or how your piece of the work fits into that success. And as a result, it makes you want to do things like, I'm just going to make rules. I mean, at least that way, if somebody comes up and breaks my balls over this, then I can just say, look, I said we're going to do this, and we did it at the end of the year, and you didn't tell me that wasn't what to do. So you can't say that I did a bad job. And but to hear what you're saying is it's that when I said about travel, there's a port that you're going to. And in the case of business, there's a success that you're going to. And that the ability to match your actions in the path that travel to the success is your ability to manage change. And so you're absolutely right that is true. There are also rules that should be rigid, like don't cut off your hand in that paper cutter. That's, you may think that you shouldn't do that, but people who lose time and work due to injury is a problem for your success. And that's a very different, it's a different level, because it's not really, but that's, there's a place for a hard and rigid rule. And then there's a place for, because that will never change. If you really just lay that out and go like, it's never going to be a good idea for you to cut your hand off with the paper cutter, that at least you can stop thinking about that. You have said to everyone, it's a danger and you have to not do that thing. And freeing up all of your ability to start to adjust to things that aren't that kind of rule-based thinking. And we've said this before, which is the idea of, is it better to be right or successful? And trying to make hardcore rules all the time, that's a desire to be right. If you want to be successful, what you're saying is, I have a place I'm trying to get to, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get to that place. So if market pressures for 1 year indicate a very aggressive, outward going type of behavior, then that's what you do. But you keep paying attention. You know that it won't always be the right thing to do. That something about the environment, something about nature will come in and say, oh, now might be a good time for you to stop doing that and maybe focus on quality of your product or something like that. But then it doesn't mean that these things aren't always parts of your thinking. Like you never are thinking to yourself actively, well, I'm much more into sales now, so I'm not going to worry at all about the quality of my product. It's really just a question of where you're going to put your emphasis. So, and that's the same for life, right? Is just this idea of being at the bottom of all of this. Water is adaptable to its container, to its movement, to how it flows, to how it is, it evaporates and it comes back down. Water is almost infinitely mutable. It can change in many ways. Whereas a rock, it's pretty much a rock. You can throw a rock, but that's just a rock in flight. It doesn't it doesn't take on a different a nature to itself, whereas water does. And so that's where I think that there's a lot of benefit to internalizing this thought, particularly when you get yourself into situations where you're like, oh, well, I keep doing this thing and it just won't work.
Right.
There's a psychological thing that, where we'll just lock on to an idea because maybe somebody told us that that's the way to do it. And that we just won't, we're so convinced that we're right about the action that we aren't allowing the situation to dictate something to us. And that's where I think the Tao is going with this, which is there's just things you can't control, and you're best to just zig and zag instead of just sitting there getting hit in the face just because you want to be solid.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot of this comes back to what you can and can't control, really. Like they're really focusing that on a lot of these chapters and just giving different examples to kind of batten down that one like core concept.
And it's interesting how different like the Stoics tackle this from how the Chinese tackle the same essential. It's the question of life, like how should I live my life?
Yeah.
And so for whatever reason, the way that the Stoics thought was in this very linear fashion. Like they will make a statement, control what you can control, and don't try to control what you don't control. Here, they work in metaphor. They'll say like, hey, be like water, don't be like the rock. And it's sort of forcing you as the reader to get deep into the text in a way that you might be able to be kind of surface level when you read the Stoics. And I've noticed that in culture broadly, is that a lot of people just will throw out Stoic concepts like it validates their position, and it's a philosophy. It doesn't have a job of validating people's positions.
Right.
And
You still need to think about it. I mean,
right.
and some people just put that sentence up as their status, and it's like, well, that's who I am now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's silly because but you can see how somebody could do that. They see a
Absolutely.
sentence, they go, oh my God, I 100% identify with that. I'm going to put this up as my status. And whereas I believe it's much harder, and just in the 4 examples you pulled up, it's a great example of how this is a text that isn't designed for somebody to look at and then look away. This is a text that's designed to, you look at it and then you go deeper into it. And it's a very different technique for trying to, as you say, and I think quite accurately, it's kind of the same ideas, because here are smart people thinking deeply about life. And life is the same in China as it is here, but how we think about it might be different.
Cool. I really like it. I'm glad we're exploring it.
Absolutely. So any more thoughts on the Tao before we move on to our next segment?
I think we can go on forever, but I think we're good right now. So why don't we just take a break? And when we're back, I'll go ahead and discuss my dad corner, and then you can give us their thought of the week.
Okay, that sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right.
And we're back. So Josh, what's up in the dad corner this week?
All right, the dad corner. So I just have some broad statements and then maybe a call to action for our audience today. And let's see what happens here. So, all right, over the past few weeks, so we didn't record on our normal time because my kid had hand, mouth, foot, and ear infection and a respiratory infection over the past like 14 days or 12 days or something like that.
Ugh.
And so, yeah, it stinks. It stinks more for him. But we're watching the kids, and we are, we lost sleep for a good 6 or 7 days. And then, after that, I really haven't bounced back. And it's been about 4 or 5 days of good sleep now.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, like that's something that's curious with me, is that I haven't bounced back. My mind's been kind of foggy, just from maybe a week of not sleeping very well, and I haven't been as sharp. So that's been interesting. But my big thing here, what I'm trying to get at is, okay, so my wife and we work full-time jobs.
Mhm.
We pay for daycare. Now, so what happened? Now, I know everyone has this problem and a lot of people solve it. Now, my issue is that how do we keep our jobs, and be able to, we have to stay home and take care of the kids. You can't dump a kid who has 3 different infections off at my parents' house to watch the kids,
Right.
because they'll get sick.
Mhm.
You obviously can't give them to daycare because you'll just get everyone else sick. So how are all these parents out here dealing with situations like this? Like this is the 3rd week I've had to take off of work in like 2 months.
Yeah.
That, and I'm very lucky to have an understanding boss and manager and everything like that. But at some of my other companies, I would have been fired by now. And so, like, my question is how do people actually do this? Are people using like grandmothers and grandfathers who just say, I'll get sick, it's fine? Like I am really at a loss to how people deal with this and keep their jobs. Or were women just stuck with this situation for 30 years, and now it's just becoming like where their jobs were basically like ruined because the men were going to work and the women were at home taking care of the kids, and And now in our relationship, we really try and do 50-50 with everything. Now the kids are going to go to the mom more often, but we're trying to split the time off of work and whatnot. And, you know, we've both still missed a lot of work like over these past few months. And my call to action to the audience is just, if you can send us any messages, if you're a parent, on how do you do it? And then maybe, you know, Uncle Greg, I know you're not a parent, but do you have any thoughts with this? I know you've been in the working world for 20 years, so you've worked with tons of parents and whatnot. So like, this is a big problem with me right now, and really questioning, like, is it worth me going to a job and all that kind of stuff? So it's just, what do you think about this situation?
I think the situation is changing a little bit, and I think and again, you could not be more accurate that I do not have children. I've never had to deal with this, and I'm the kind of person that you need to watch out for being like, the kids are always getting sick, and I'll be bitter about somebody not showing up, and it's just but I know it's just stupid, but. To your point, I think that you've struck upon something very important. And I think it's got a few parts to it. And one of the parts is cultural, because you're absolutely right. I would say up until 1980-ish, that it was a lock that you assumed that the mother didn't work. Like, and everything was built around the idea that there was always a parent at home. And that as a culture, we have a very hard time changing. So that's just one part. It's the cultural part, and how do we interact with the reality of two parents working full time. The second part is that I think that businesses are getting more and more savvy to the fact of this, because a challenge for both you and Amber is that this period in your life ends relatively quickly, like 2 years ish, 3
Basically
years.
when both kids are 5 and they're going to school, like that's basically when this ends.
And then there will always be things, but it's not as like the fact that the rain is going to come is very much the same as I have an infant and it's just sick and bad things are happening and we have to pay full-time attention to it. So I think that's a true fact, but I too would be really curious about how other parents are dealing with this, because I don't think there is a way. I'm curious in all the different ways that people deal with this, because quite frankly, it's part of our culture to sort of assume that it's the parent problem, like fix it. And it's not one where everybody has that very human realization that, oh wow, everybody's got to put up with this, and that it is temporary, and that if we want to have new children in our society, we have to be flexible for these kinds of things. And so I do think that I'm in hopes that the current work that you guys have are these kinds of companies that realize that it's a real thing. There may be a price attached to it. Like I've always thought that it would be much better for people to be given the option to, at minimum, maybe do time off without pay for these brief stretches, just so that, you know, at the bare minimum, you don't lose your job, but you know, you have a temporary gap in money. But even that's not tenable for a lot of families. A lot of families need that money every friggin' week.
Right.
So I do think that it's a problem that I think that a lot of people are aware of, and that the reactions or responses to it is all over the map.
Right.
That it's just, if you're lucky to have a job that's going to work with you, that's great. But if you aren't, then it's bad.
Yeah, so we're just lucky now. And so, Philosophy Fools audience, if you guys have any ideas or thoughts, just let us know, and we'll go from there. But on the good note, little Charlie is doing much better, and he'll be returning to preschool on Monday, or daycare on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
But he's feeling better, and so everything's good now. So that's good.
That's great. Well, let's hope that the next Dad's Corner, everybody's healthy, and that you're miles away from your brain is working right and you've recovered fully.
I hope so too. All right, well, that's it for me. All right, Uncle Greg, so give us your thought of the week.
It's funny that this because I chose this thought a while ago, but it sort of fits in with what we talked about today, and it's from our boy Seneca, and it's this: expecting is the greatest impediment to living. In anticipation of tomorrow, it loses today. And so it's this. I just want people to remember that the present moment is easy to slip out of. That we can slip into the past and live there, or we can slip into the future and live there. And the challenge of life is to live in the present moment, because the thing about living in the past or the future is we kind of control it because it's just our imagination. But living in the present moment is where we do our real living, and where we accomplish real things, and where we have real conversations with other people, and that we are truly alive. So I just wanted to pass that on to folks. Thinking about, like, if we're experiencing stress, anxiety, and fear, is expectation a part of what's driving those feelings?
Cool. I love it. Be mindful and be present.
Right on, brother. Okay.
All right. Cool. Well, it looks like this is going to close us out for today. And thanks for watching Philosophy Fools. It was good talking to you, Uncle Greg.
And the same here, Josh. It's always a pleasure. And it was a bummer when we couldn't talk, but I'm glad we're back at it now.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Stay curious. Hey folks, Uncle Greg here. Just wanted to thank you for listening, and be sure to join us next time when we tackle more of life's big ideas. Be sure to share our show with your friends and contact us at PhilosophyFoolsPodcast@gmail.com with your thoughts and suggestions. As always, a special thanks to Ted Onulak and Exit 10 for our music. You can check them out at exit10band.com. That's EXIT10BAND.com.